Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Duke, your host for Freedom Project Media's original programming. We're very pleased to bring you the first in our series of lectures on the medieval university. The title of this seminar is Universities, History, Purpose, and Politics. And over 4 different segments, we're going to look at the rise of medieval universities, how Christians put the university system together. We'll move on to other topics, including the rise of the American university and how it differed from the medieval university. Today's segment is going to be all about the medieval university, the creation of the university. So we begin with the rise of the universities in medieval Europe. And the word university itself, it's a very interesting word. You can certainly see the root universe in it. As with the term Catholic, as in Roman Catholic Church, the word Catholic having as a synonym universal, right? Something that is all-inclusive. So too, the modern university, created by Roman Catholic Christians in the Middle Ages, was conceived as a universal place where people could incorporate, where people could come together to learn an incredibly diverse curriculum. It comes from the Latin word, ultimately, universitas, which literally means a corporation, a whole, a number of people incorporating into one body. The European universities evolved from Christian cathedral and monastic schools. What does that mean? The universities got their starts right around the 10th century, the 11th century, about the year 1000. Universities right before and right after the year 1,000 years after the birth of Christ, they began to incorporate this way. But that's not the beginning of the story of Western education, and certainly not the beginning of the story of the universities. We go all the way back to the cathedral schools and the monastery schools. Really, as early as the 4th century after Christ, during the time of St. Augustine, you began to get these monastery schools. And as you moved a little bit further into medieval history, by the time you get to Charlemagne, who we see on screen here, the Holy Roman Emperor, the first Holy Roman Emperor. Charlemagne was crowned king of the Holy Roman Emperor of the Empire in 800 AD on Christmas Day, died in 814. Charlemagne was one of many rulers, not the first, who created these mandates for monastery and cathedral schools. What that means is that edicts, bills, orders went out to the monasteries and the cathedrals that every monastery and cathedral had to have its own school. These schools were Christian-based, obviously. They were primarily devoted to men. Women couldn't go because they were preparing young children, the children of nobles, primarily for holy office, to take clerical vows, to serve the church either in secular or ordained roles. And Charlemagne created one of the most famous cathedral schools and insisted that the monasteries all across his empire, and the Holy Roman Empire, by the way, consisted largely of what we now know to be France, Germany, and even part of Eastern Europe, a very wide swath of territory. And Charlemagne, across his dominion, called for the creation of these cathedral and monastery schools to begin to give an individual education to the children of nobility. By the time you get from the 9th century, as I said, to the 11th century, right about the year 1000, we have now for the first time the founding of the universities. By general consent, we believe the University of Bologna in Italy is the earliest of the universities, being recognized as such by about 1088, shortly followed by the University of Paris and Oxford University. In England. These are all, of course, arbitrary numbers because we know, for instance, that there was teaching going on at Oxford easily 100 years before the official date of the start of the university. What ended up having to happen is a series of edicts by secular rulers or papal bulls, edicts from popes, had to grant these individual universities certain privileges and responsibilities, certain rights that other collective groups of teachers didn't have before they could technically be considered an incorporated universitas specializing in the study of the universe. So give or take, you could rearrange the first couple a little bit, but Bologna generally in Italy is the first by 1088. By 1150 you have the University of Paris, and by 1167 you have Oxford. And shortly thereafter, Modena in Italy, Cambridge University by the early 13th century, the University of Salamanca, Spain's first great experiment with universities, 1218, Montpellier, Padua, a remarkable school, university, medieval university we'll see a little bit later in the program, and you go all the way on down the road there. And get a sense of what these institutions to this day, it really is a remarkable thing. It has been pointed out by many that the Roman Catholic Church, which is responsible for the creation of all these universities, there was no such thing in the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, really up until very modern times. There was no such thing as a secular university. These universities were universal in the sense that they were theologically specific. They were created by religious men and women, Christians, to begin to study not just theology, which really, believe it or not, theology wasn't studied by undergraduates so much. When the misnomer we have when we think about the medieval universities is that all they were doing, monks were sitting around studying the heavens and nothing else. It wasn't really true. The serious study of theology really didn't begin for a universitas student until they were well advanced beyond what we would call the bachelor's degree, graduate work. But to get a sense of these remarkable institutions, here we are 1,000 years, give or take, from the founding of the University of Bologna. And you can see there it is today, thriving economic hub. Notice the square at the center of the university. That's where we get the word quad from, isn't it? That many of these medieval universities were set up on square plains architecturally, and at the center of every university you had a big square, and that, of course, is the quad. You can see the University of Paris in France. Oxford University is a classic example. You can see how the early buildings surround the square. Kind of beautiful, right? You've got these wonderful old buildings, the picturesque architecture, and right in the center of that, you've got that square plot of sod. The University of Modena, we mentioned, in Italy, Cambridge, and then Salamanca in Spain. And what had to happen to get these to the point where those dates meant something? To get to the point where those dates that you see there for the universities actually were targeted as when the university ceased being a collection of teachers, a group of students. As we know, in many of those instances, that had been going on for up to 100 years before those dates of incorporation took place. But things like this had to happen. Looking at your screen, the Emperor Frederick I, for instance, in his Authentica Habita, 1158, he gave the first privileges to students in Bologna. In other words, Bologna, which we believe to be the earliest of the institutions, within 100 years or so of its founding, he gave particular privileges by imperial edict, right? To allow those students to congregate, to begin a course of study, to contract out with certain professors or masters who would teach them. Now, this is interesting. It wasn't like the modern universities where a professor would be in a classroom and your kids would all tumble into the classroom and learn from different teachers and rotate throughout the buildings in the course of the day. Inevitably, the early universities, small groups of students who wanted to study certain subjects, they would contract directly with a professor, a magister, a master, who would be responsible for overseeing their education. But going back to our chart, besides the Emperor Frederick, we had mentioned that either secular authority or religious authority was needed to mandate certain prerogatives and privileges for the universities to be able to be recognized. And in 1231, shortly after Emperor Frederick, Gregory IX issued the very important bull, Parens Scientiarum, 1231, which formally recognized the University of Paris. Paris, not surprisingly, the University of Paris, Oxford, and Bologna all have the friendly rivalry about which was started the soonest, all three terribly important universities in the history of Western thought. So Pope Gregory's bull actually formally recognizes the University of Paris, giving its teachers, its masters, and its students all sorts of rights and privileges that otherwise wouldn't have been granted, that allowed them to become universal, to incorporate. The third bullet point, prior to these incorporations, these universitizing edicts that were granted to the schools by the church or the state, prior to this, the so-called Studium Generale, general studies, the university general studies, and then the universitas itself, which is the corporation of students and teachers. You can almost look at it, if you know anything about medieval guilds, you may recall from your early European history courses that guilds was a very feudal way of organizing society. Different trade groups, the wool dyers, the cloth makers, right, the bakers, would all organize in guilds, what today we might even call unions, that oftentimes had the sanction, the imprimatur of the church or of the local civic government. You can sort of see the universities emanating out of that tradition as well. And so prior to this, you had the Studium Generale, that general course of studies that made universal the university. And of course, the universitas was the actual incorporation of students and teachers, oftentimes, always under these mandates, edicts, or bulls. They had long existed before Gregory's bull, but Gregory's papal bull in 1231 granted them unprecedented autonomy, freedom to go about their business once the charter was granted, even regardless of what the local civic authorities said, or even the local church and bishops sometime. So right away what you're getting here in the modern university is, even though the imprimatur of the bishop, the church, the pope, or the emperor, the king, the duke, the regent, those things were required for the incorporation of the universities. Once they were given autonomy, as they were by Gregory in 1231, once they were given autonomy, that meant that they could begin a course of studies, they could begin to chart a path of knowledge, learning, the conference of degrees, the licensing of various types of professions. They could begin to do that really regardless of what the church or the state had to say. The church and the state, we see that today with the universities. All the big state universities, University of Wisconsin, University of Michigan, Ohio State, they have tremendous autonomy within the state, and yet the legislatures, not so much the religious authorities anymore, but certainly the legislators are still working closely with them at various points, trying to impose rights and responsibilities or free them from rights and responsibilities. So moving to the next slide, Pope Gregory IX is kind of a watershed moment. His papacy and the various legislation, the bulls he issued with regards to education. Pope Gregory IX issued that papal bull of 1233 that stipulated that anyone admitted to be a teacher in Toulouse, for instance, in France, had the right to teach everywhere without further examination. This was remarkable because the teachers at the local college would no longer have, if they wanted to go teach in Paris, they would no longer have to get recertified, so to speak, loosely articulated. They would not have to test or to be grilled or to be vetted academically to be able to teach. Their credentials now translated wherever they went. So that was really a big deal. Admitted to be a teacher in Toulouse, had the right to teach everywhere without further examination. Such privileges became a hallmark of these new universities. And if you think about it, here we are 1,000 years later, and things like tenure, things like the universal degree, the idea that you could get your degree from Harvard University on the East Coast and end up teaching at UCLA on the West Coast without having to jump through any local specific hurdles. That's the universitizing movement in higher education in the Middle Ages. By 1292, the oldest of the universities, Bologna in Paris, actually sought out similar bulls from Pope Nicholas IV, granting them the same privileges, and we were off to the races, so to speak. So what, then, did they teach in the universities? How did they go about their business? I already gave away a bit of the game. When we think about the stereotypical view of the medieval university, a couple things come to mind. The secular revisionist history of the last couple hundred years, certainly since the Enlightenment. The idea that we have in our heads now about medieval universities, it's a bunch of very rigorous, ascetic Roman Catholic monks who were anti-science, who were inquisitorial, who were skeptical of knowledge. The modern retelling of the story, this is a bunch of closed-minded people engaging in closed-minded study of very closed-minded subjects. Everything was theological. The sciences were at radical odds and banished. Scientific understanding as they had it was banished from the campuses. It really just isn't true. The mandate that came from the Roman Catholic Church, along with various emperors and kings and potentates, was to create the university in the spirit of Christian thought. And the idea is that the Lord God is the creator of knowledge. He's the creator of the universe. Nature is his creature. Human beings are his primary work. And that being the case, there could be no logical or existential reason why the study of man and the study of the universe was off limits. They didn't have what you and I would call science in the Middle Ages, but they did have natural philosophy. And natural philosophy was the medieval word, and into the Renaissance, the medieval word for science. The philosophy of the natural world, as opposed to theology, which was the philosophy, the study of God. They had law and medicine as well. But at the lowest grades, what we would call today, what has evolved into what we would call today undergraduate education, the concept of the liberal arts still dominates, doesn't it? When you send your kids off to the modern university, inevitably they can't just go to a university and major in their area. They can't just decide, okay, I've graduated high school, I want to go to the University of Missouri, and I want to major in journalism, and I want to focus only on that. No. The modern university, as a holdover from medieval times, it incorporates what we call the liberal arts, which we're going to talk about here. and the centrality of the liberal arts. Before you could study your area of specialty, of course, they didn't have journalism back in the 12th century, but they did have the higher order studies. Once you completed your undergraduate program, the 7 liberal arts, which we'll talk about here in a moment, you could then graduate to study theology, medicine, and law. Doctors were being increasingly regulated by the universities. Prior to this, in the Middle Ages, the study of medicine was a very fraught thing. You had guilds, the College of Barber Surgeons, for instance. So in other words, the same people who pulled your teeth and cut your hair, the barbers, were the same people who would bleed you and perform surgical operations. Didn't go over very well in the early Middle Ages, as you can imagine. The idea that a barber would be qualified to do the kind of advanced surgery that we now think of today, even at their time, removing kidney stones, trephining the skull, bleeding, phlebotomy, right? The kind of things that they engaged in the Middle Ages. There was no really, other than the guild itself, no overriding regulatory body. And so the universities took on very rapidly the licensing of medicine, the licensing of lawyers, the practicing at the graduate level of law, and of course theology. But how did you get there? How did you get to the point where you were prepared to do that so-called graduate work? You had to pass through the liberal arts, the 7 liberal arts. And these are really fascinating concepts. We need to linger over them a little bit. You had the first course of study, which could be loosely equated with the first 2 years of college when you're doing your very basic gen ed courses. That would be the Trivium. The Trivium. 3 separate courses, one in grammar, one in logic or dialectic, and one in rhetoric. Now, of course, this is the equivalent, as I said, of kind of like an associate's degree. Before you could graduate onto the quadrivium, the 4 subjects that include arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy, you could call them your upper division coursework in undergraduate school. Trivium, the word literally means 3, tri, via, 3 ways, or streets, 3 ways. And oftentimes, the Trivium, from its linguistic origins, was the place where 3 streets would meet. Right? And we do. You're right. You're absolutely right what you're thinking at home. The word trivia also comes from this idea of the place where 3 roads meet, a place where all sorts of knowledge and gossip was exchanged. In the medieval city planning, for instance, wherever you had an intersection of 3 streets, that was a very popular intersection. Oftentimes, the ladies would gather at those intersections and they'd share the gossip of the day. They'd share the local trivia. Also applies, in this instance, of course, 3 ways to knowledge. And what a remarkable thing it is. You began your education, all students did whatever they wanted to major in, whatever they wanted to ultimately get licensed in, whether it be law, theology, or medicine. At the graduate level, they had to do a course of grammar. And what is grammar? It is remarkable. As a university professor myself, I can tell you, we've stopped teaching grammar at the universities. The rampant political correctness of our modern universities has more or less told young teachers that we don't teach grammar in freshman writing classes anymore. Every kid going to college is going to have to take a freshman writing course. So, again, a holdover you can see from that liberal arts concept that goes all the way back 1,000 years. But in many, including at the universities I've taught at, we don't teach grammar anymore. The very concept of grammar, the idea that there are building block mechanics to both speaking and writing, that being able to write well requires a very familiar mechanical knowledge of how language works, that's gone. The political correctness of our modern universities makes the argument that there's no one right way to speak. There's no better way to speak. If people want to speak ungrammatically, if they want to eschew punctuation, not know how to use commas, speak in slang, well, that's okay. I mean, knowledge, like everything else in the modern university, knowledge is completely relative. And so if you want to say that there is a correct form of speaking or a correct form of writing, well, that's just downright discriminatory. And so you can see, after 1,000 years, universities almost on every front now are beginning to cede the idea that there's even truth. The medieval universities absolutely dramatically pursued truth. And you could really see the difference. What we would call a classical education, going all the way back through the formation of the universities, back to those cathedral and monastery schools, they were based on grammar. First thing the students had to learn was how to construct language. There's a right way and a wrong way, a better way and a worse way. There's a way that leads to clear thinking, analytic thought, and clarity. And then there are ways that obscure those things. And so you had to have that foundational grammar. Then, perhaps most interestingly for the first few years at the university is logic, another word for which, and the word they would have been much more comfortable with 1,000 years ago, dialectic. Dialectic is one of those fancy linguistic philosophical sounding words, but it's really easy. It's like dialogue, right? When you are engaging in a dialogue with somebody, it's you talking to somebody else. You're going back and forth. The conversation, right? In dialogue, you say something, somebody responds, and the conversation evolves naturally, sharing information, coming to a greater understanding of each other, coming to a mastery of what the subject you're discussing is in terms of what you both know. Dialectic is the same thing. Dialectic is basically dialoguing with texts. And you've probably seen enough old medieval movies set in the Middle Ages, like Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, for instance, to have a vague sense of what dialectic was. You'd have a manuscript. It was usually a manuscript from the Bible or a manuscript from the ancient classical writers. Aristotle, for instance, by the time you get to the 12th century, 13th century, Aristotle was a huge cornerstone of the medieval university. Thomas Aquinas, the great doctor, the angelic doctor of the Catholic Church, born in 1225, died in 1274. And Aquinas was remarkable in that he took Aristotle from the ancient world and aligned, in the university setting, aligned Aristotelian scientific rational thought, aligned that with Christian theology. So Aristotle would become big. But dialectic is when you have a text in front of you. And oftentimes, that text may be 200-300 years old. It's been written much earlier in the Middle Ages. And all throughout the margins of the text, editors, scribes, the monks who copied it out, professors would, in the margins of those texts, write commentaries, would make little observations, right? And so what you've got is texts speaking to texts, speaking to text. You could read a page of Aristotle, and then you could see different commentaries from different writers there, different members of the professoriate, philosophers, scribes, copyists, who would, in the marginalia of the text, write out their own interpretations or suggest etymologies or suggest definitions of words or suggest parallels in the text between other passages in that book and other texts, other ancient manuscripts or biblical manuscripts. And hence the idea of dialectic was born. Texts talking to texts, talking to texts, talking to people, down through centuries, sometimes even 1,000 years, 2,000 years, dating back to the ancient Greeks and Romans, or the earliest biblical commentaries that were saved and translated into the vernacular of the day, the Latin of the day. And so dialectic is really critically important. Before you do anything else, you learn grammar, you learn the mechanics of language, right? It's like asking somebody to build and understand automobiles who hasn't the vaguest idea of what's under the hood or how it fits together. Or like asking doctors to cure sick human bodies when they have no idea what's under the skin. And that was actually a problem in the Middle Ages that the schools, the universities, began to help fix, as we will see before we're done today. But dialectic is absolutely critical. You may have heard the term scholasticism. Scholastic philosophy. That's dialectic carried to oftentimes an absurd degree. You've probably heard the famous anecdote about medieval philosophers arguing about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. What was the food of the angels, right? The quantitative differences in material and immaterial bodies of angels. It could get really, really intense. The schoolmen, the scholastics, are really a caricature of this medieval process, which is in itself a remarkable process. This idea that text would take on lives of themselves, that texts would engage in give and take dialogue with the people translating them, writing them, reading them. It's a beautiful idea. It did get carried to extreme by the time you got to the High Middle Ages, and they were disputing incredibly tendentious and small philosophical points in voluminous tomes. That's the schoolmen, that's scholasticism. That's the excess of this particular model. We more or less have gotten rid of the dialectical matter. We've replaced it with a different kind of dialectic, more of a Hegelian dialectic approach, which is slightly different. But when you think about the nature of this classical learning, it starts with grammar, the building blocks, the rudiments. It gives way to logic, dialectic. So you've got the tools of language, you know how they fit. Now you get the logic of it all, right? What is the metaphysical, the intellectual way that the texts hang together? How do we engage with a book to be able to read it properly? I tell you, my kids at the university, I got juniors and seniors graduating from college, and they read at about a 7th, 8th grade level. I'm a Shakespeare professor trying to teach Shakespeare to my kids in the modern university. It's exceedingly difficult because they don't have the grammar, They don't have the dialectical context. They can't read a book like Shakespeare. You drop it in front of them. They don't have tools of grammar, language, dialectic, even rhetoric is lost on them. And that third part of the trivium is absolutely amazing, because once you've got the building blocks, the grammar of your subject, then you engage the logic, the dialectical interplay between reader and writer, between text and teacher, between text and student. Then you get rhetoric. And rhetoric is a fancy way of saying how you then relate what you know to others. And that, of course, is the three of those things together lead to wisdom. You understand the way a thing works. You understand its intellectual entanglements, so to speak. And then you're able to rhetorically talk about it to your students, to your friends, to whoever else you're going to engage with. A remarkable way of doing things. That would account for roughly your undergraduate, your first 2 years, your associate's degree. Remember, these associations between the modern and the ancient world, you can see so many things, right, that we still hold over today. The mortar boards that kids wear when they graduate, the whole idea of a quad, the idea of a curriculum, right, rhetoric, courses, and the idea that writing historically had been based on grammar. All of these things, and many, many more, are holdovers. So once you completed that course, right, that allowed you to move forward to the higher order things that needed the grammatical approach, the dialectical approach, and the rhetorical approach. Once you'd honed those skills, then you moved on to the quadrivium, right? Quad meaning four. This is the 4 ways. These are the higher students graduating, who graduated from the first part, the trivium, and arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy. And that's remarkable. These 7 issues together, these 7 subjects, recreate what the medieval university believed was the classical Greek and Roman way of educating kids. And arithmetic, which is straight numbers, it's math. And what is geometry then? If arithmetic is obviously being able to, and notice how it parallels beautifully with grammar. If you're going to learn the parts of speech, to identify them, how they fit together, you do the same thing with arithmetic. Arithmetic is getting your numbers, is getting the vocabulary down in numbers. It's getting the syntax down in numbers. All right, way beyond basic counting, multiplying, dividing. The mastery of what we would call basic arithmetic, it's the vocabulary just used with numbers instead of words. And if arithmetic then is mathematical, numerical, it is learning the grammar to be able to manipulate numerals the way you manipulate words, then geometry, it's just numbers in space. What a beautiful medieval concept. How do you think people without cranes and people without hydraulic equipment, how were they able to build the cathedrals? How were they able, miracles, right, over a 100-year span sometimes, to put up the Cathedral of Notre Dame or Chartres Cathedral? The great edifices of medieval Europe require incredibly sophisticated engineering skill, so again, especially without hydraulic, basically backbreaking manpower, without all the hydraulic conveniences in terms of tools and machinery we have today. Geometry is music in space. It's the music of numbers in space. Numbers in space, how do you build a dome? How do you erect an arch? How do you create the great pillars, the foundations of these modern cathedrals? So arithmetic and geometry, separate enough to be separate subjects within the quadrivium. Music. That's an odd one to us, right? I mean, we wouldn't think of the study of music as having the similar significance to many of the other things on this list, but they did. You remember what music is? Music is harmony, right? And how did God make the universe? Harmonically. This cannot be understated. What did God do when he created the universe? He went into the void. He went into chaos. Randomness. Chaos, not nothing, it was chaos that was the primordial state of reality, the book of Genesis tells us. And what did God do? He went into the chaos and he ordered it. He went into chaos and he put things in order. He took randomness and subordinated it to intellect to build. Right? And so the study of music, harmonic, it's all about how do you replicate the harmony that we find in God's universe. As a matter of fact, the Middle Ages absolutely believed in the music of the spheres. Astronomy is our 4th subject, isn't it? And in just the same way that arithmetic is practical and geometry is numbers in space, you could argue that music theory is practical. And astronomy, then, is the study of the harmony in the heavens, right? The harmony in the stars. The Middle Ages absolutely believed in the so-called music of the spheres. The idea that all the heavenly bodies surrounded the earth. The earth, the earth was the center of the universe. The old Ptolemaic system that had the earth at the center of the universe, and then the moon, and then the various planets that they knew surrounding and rotating around the earth in various elliptical motions. That idea, they believed, when these heavenly bodies moved, when the moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus, when these planets moved around the earth, they created this incredible celestial music, this harmony, the music of the spheres. As the heavenly bodies danced above us, they played this incredibly moving music, divine music. And the argument is that in the Garden of Eden, before man fell, we could hear it. That Adam and Eve in the garden, before original sin, before they had betrayed their faith in God and chose with their free will the one thing God said you cannot choose, they could hear it. I mean, it's kind of like having a soundtrack for your life. You know, it's always amazing when you go see movies, right? And certain movies can get you fired up. A really romantic soundtrack and a love story can make you melancholy or tender. But in a movie like Rocky, right, when he's running up the steps of the Philadelphia Museum and those trumpets are blaring, it makes you want to go out and run through a brick wall. Imagine having that kind of harmonic quality in your life. It's like the soundtrack of our lives, the right music for every mood every time we played it. And so music then, the study of the numbers that give rise to harmony, they then applied broadly out to space, like arithmetic does for geometry, projected out in space. And you begin to try to understand, you can call this, in some ways, you could really, I don't know that this has ever been pointed out before, it seems obvious to me, but music and astronomy, the way they taught them and understood them, they're kind of like the origins of physics in the modern world. You think about what physics is today, physica comes from the ancient Greek word, right? You think about what physics is today, really it is the mathematical study of the numbers of the universe, isn't it? If you ever watch TV shows like The Big Bang Theory, and you see Sheldon Cooper, the arch physicist, he's constantly studying the natural world without ever going out in it, right? He's always got his little grease board, and he's doing increasingly sophisticated numerical analysis on the board, right? And so rather than actually living in the natural world and studying it, he's theoretically applying numbers, looking at the numbers that keep the universe up, that supports it, keep it in place. And so it's what a beautiful little paradigm you have here with these 7 liberal arts. Liberal in this sense, meaning broad, right? You've got the word Catholic, which to Catholics of the period was a synonym for universal. You've got the universities, which strove for universality in terms of understanding every single thing that God made and every single pathway to understanding the things that God made. And then you've got these liberal arts, liberal in the sense of broad, right? Of course, the word is a loaded political word for us in the modern world, but for them, it just meant really broad and deep, right? Liberal in that sense. And so the union of the trivium with the quadrivium is remarkable, but all of these numbers too, as you know, in medieval universities too, in the Middle Ages, numbers carried tremendous significances. The trivia, 3, is an important number because 3 was the number of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. 4 was the number of the human being, the four elements combined in the human body, air, earth, fire, and water. The 4 known elements, air, earth, fire, and water, came to stand for the human creature. Because the argument was in the Middle Ages that the human being, the human body, was the perfect union of the 4 elements. The breath that we breathe is air. The fire that is our soul. The body which is pure earth. The watery things, the body mostly made up out of water and fluids. They believed that of all the 4 elements God made, air, earth, fire, and water, that the human creature, the human being, was the perfect amalgam of those 4 material substances. So in the trivium, you've got the 3 and the 4. You've got God in 3, and you've got man in 4. And this idea that you're joining, even on the numerical basis, you're joining man and God in the 3 and 4 study that sums up the trivia and the quadrivium. And for about 1,000 years, in art, in sculpture, they would make images, and they would certainly write about the four muses, the four goddesses of the liberal arts. You can see in this particular picture, rather late, from Francesco Pessalino, about 1450, smack dab in the middle of the Renaissance, you see the seven liberal arts, always conceived as women, as a paean back to the Eumenides, the Greek fates, the nine muses of the ancient world. You can see there they are: arithmetic, geometria, music, astrology, logic, rhetoric, and grammar. And you can see at the feet of the seven ladies of the liberal arts, you can see a great sage from the ancient world who was unusually adept at that particular art. Right? And so you can see the small male figures who represent human achievement in those particular areas, and the seven lady liberal arts themselves. The universities weren't places where Christians, in this case Catholics, sat around and tried to limit what people understood. As always, there were things beyond which you didn't go. The great medieval story of Faust, for instance, the Faust book, about an incredibly brilliant German Christian scholar who gets fed up and tired with the earthly limits of the seven liberal arts, wants something more. He wants something more than law or philosophy or medicine. He's mastered all those subjects at the MA level, at the graduate level. He seeks necromancy. He sells his soul, Faustus, for 24 years of power to the devil because he wants a kind of knowledge, scientia, another word for knowledge, right? He wants a kind of knowledge that goes beyond what everybody else knows. And you get that wonderful psychomachia, that battle back and forth for the soul of Faustus between God and his angels and the devil. And so this idea here that there were boundaries, that as a Christian scholar, there were some subjects that you couldn't study, the occult, for instance, this necromancy. Now, necromancy literally means, as a word, speaking with the dead. The kind of certainly astronomy and astrology were all bound up in each other back then, but we're talking about sorcery here, witchcraft, those sorts of subjects. But outside of that, the university was really quite broad-minded. I mean, I think of, by the time you get to Shakespeare's Hamlet, for instance, in about the year 1600, Hamlet himself says to his friend Horatio, who's a natural philosopher. Horatio in that play is a scientist, and he doesn't believe that there are such things as ghosts, even though Hamlet's seen them. So one night, Hamlet takes Horatio, the scientist, up on top of the roof of the castle of Elsinore in Denmark, and sure enough, the ghost of Hamlet's father appears. At which point, the frustrated scientist said, "I had not believed this. Had I not, with the sensible and true avouch of mine own eye, seen it. If I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't have believed it." Which cues Hamlet, as early as 1600, to say, "Horatio, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy, that the scientific world isn't big enough to understand all the other things as well." And so we see this tension already arising. One of the things I thought I'd like to do, besides dispelling that idea that somehow universities were anti-truth, or that the universities stood lock, stock in the way of scientific achievement, it wasn't true. There are certainly times in the history of science in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance where the church, where churches, where Christianity, religion in general, objected to where certain scientific theories were going. Everybody knows the paradigmatic case of Galileo. But if I asked you to pick one other person from the Middle Ages of the Renaissance who was persecuted because of their scientific beliefs, you'd probably have a difficult time naming one. Nevertheless, because of Galileo's experiences, we have this tendency to think that the church was this incredibly repressive place with regards to science. It wasn't. Modern science as we know it, the Enlightenment as we know it, could not have occurred. It didn't occur in opposition to the church or to Christianity. It was Christian scholarship, Christian thinkers, that paved the way for an understanding of the universe that was purely material, even though Christianity, most Christian scholars would not go that far. It's blasphemy, right, to use scientific knowledge to conclude there is no God. God gave us reason. God gave us the natural world. So the argument from the Christian scholars, it makes perfect sense to me, that when you rip the mask off the face of nature, you see the face of God. Speaking of Sheldon Cooper in The Big Bang Theory, he makes the same point, right? That the purpose of one episode, he says, the purpose of physics is to study the natural world so as to rip the face off nature, to stare into the face of God. I think that's exactly right. That's what their ambitions were. And it did give rise to secular science. And secular science could not have gotten where, notice how in non-Christian countries, science, medicine did not progress nearly at the rate they did in Christian countries because you had this kind of open inquiry. I'll give you one example. We got some time left, and I want to give you some example. I want to look at one of the higher courses at university. Once you got through the Trivium and then graduated to the Quadrivium, then you would be able to specialize in, as I said before, theology, the philosophy of God, law, or medicine. Let's take the case of medicine as a paradigmatic way of looking at how this freedom, this relative freedom, because of Christian universities, enabled medical development. What I want to show you, this is the picture of, I raised that tantalizing question for you before. How could doctors, how could men of medicine, how could they treat human bodies when they'd never seen inside them? For all practical purposes, the dissection of human bodies had been banished everywhere in the world. There was no culture on earth that dissected actual human bodies. This includes the Greeks. For all of Aristotle's brilliant anatomical observations, he made them on animals, not men. And as far as we know, not the Greeks, not the Romans, not the Chinese, not the Peruvians, not the Incans, nobody, no culture and no religion authorized the dissecting of human bodies to study them for medical purposes. Now, you think about what happened. Certainly in the Middle Ages, they had all sorts of wonderful herbal cures. They understood medicine, even without knowing what was beneath the skin, not having really studied the interior of the human body at the universities. And the Chinese medicine, for instance, was fantastic. It still is. Holistic medicine. Without necessarily studying bodies dissected, that the Chinese medicine, certainly in the ancient world, it understood pathways and energies. And so it was holistic, but it was not based on anything scientific, really, in the sense that we had dissected a body to find out what the organs were, to label them, to study them, to figure out what their functions and their processes were. That all began really in earnest in the Middle Ages. In the ancient world, Greece and Rome, certainly they dissected lots and lots of animals. In fact, Galen, the most important doctor in Western history prior to the Renaissance, Galen dissected and wrote dissection manuals, but the primary animal he dissected was a monkey. And so while certainly the myology, the muscle structure of monkeys and men is fairly compatible, but when it comes to things like organs, when it comes to higher order things like that, studying monkeys is going to make, or lesser animals in general, is going to make really for bad human medicine. And it wouldn't be until the rise of universities in the Middle Ages, as we've been talking about, that all this would be rectified. The person on your screen is Mondino de Luzzi. He was born in 1270, about the very year Dante was born, 1265, and he died in 1326. Dante, the great poet, the great student of harmonics, because let's face it, the quadrivium, harmony, the study of harmonics, that's also the study of poetry. What is poetry? Poetry is taking words and putting them in the most musical order to the human ear and the human soul. Dante was born in 1265, the great Italian poet, died in 1321. De Luzzi was born in 1270, died in 1326. And at the exact end, keep in mind that Aquinas himself was dead in 1274. So what do you have here? You have a classic example in the illustration of how medieval teaching was done. The professor, the master, the teacher, almost always sat in a great chair, or literally, as we've come to know it, ex cathedra. Cathedra meaning chair, right? The professor would sit in his chair. And again, holdovers from the ancient world. We give endowed professors chairs, don't we? It's not like today when somebody funds a particular professor in a certain area, we give them an actual chair to sit in, but that's what they did in the Middle Ages. And so the professor would sit in his chair ex cathedra, and you can see him engaging in dialectic, right? Logic from the Trivium. He's got a book in his hand. In this case, it would have to be probably one of Galen's books from the Roman period. Galen lived from about 122 AD to about 199 AD. He's, again, the greatest doctor of the ancient world, and the one who set modern anatomy, who set anatomy on its course, who, through his numerous dissections of monkeys, came up with as close to an account of human anatomy as we had ever had. What de Luzzi's doing here, he is called the reformer of anatomy, and in the schools, with the full authorization and sanction of the church, he is overseeing a dissection. You have an actual human body laid out there on the bench. You have a barber surgeon, we mentioned them, right? One of the guildsmen, a barber basically, who is opening the cadaver while the professor reads ex cathedra in a dialectical way from the text. He's reading the text of Galen. He is reading the commentary in his book over the years on Galen, and he is offering his own to the students. And the remarkable thing was, where'd the bodies come from? The Roman Catholic Church did not let, in general, bodies be dissected. The Catholic Church believed that the body, the physical body of the human being, would be reunited at some point with the soul. And so consequently, the church didn't allow just anybody to be dissected. But the church had to sign off on this. The bodies that were dissected in front of the students were the bodies of executed felons. And there's a certain kind of harsh justice to this, that those criminals who were adjudged to death, those criminals who had transgressed in such a way that the culture of the day demanded their death in the name of justice, those bodies were turned over to the anatomists, the professors. And so you can see Mondino de Luzzi, there he is, this reformer of anatomy. He is engaging in that dialectical method. He sits as a professor in his great chair. He reads from the text of the ancients. He engages it in dialogue. You can see the knife on the table. The barber, basically a glorified butcher, has opened the chest cavity, the abdomen, I should say, of the cadaver of an executed felon. And he is going to find there, the barber, what the doctor says is there. So whatever Mondino, reading Galen, says should be there, that's what the barber was going to find. And you can imagine, first of all, this is a great leap forward, because for the first time in human history, they're actually dissecting bodies, number one. But on the other side, if you look at that picture again, here's a problem. The doctor who's reading the book, the one who understands the Latin, the barbers almost never did. The doctor who understands the Latin is telling the unlearned barber, the butcher, what to find in a cadaver. The doctor himself never really engaged with it. So go to the next picture here. And of course, de Luzzi is at the University of Bologna, that first school. By the time you get not that far, than a couple hundred years in the future, you've got Andreas Vesalius of Brussels. This is the Fabrica, on the fabric of the human body. This is the greatest anatomical text of the modern world, 1543, the exact same year that Copernicus decentered the universe by suggesting that it was the sun, not the Earth, that is the center of the universe. The old earthbound Ptolemaic system goes away, and now you get heliocentrism, the idea that the Earth is the center of the universe. 1543, you have Vesalius. And what Vesalius does, 200 years after de Luzzi, is he goes forward, and now the doctor at the center of the picture. Let's go to that one. At the very center of this picture, this is the great textbook of early anatomy. There's the doctor with the beard. He's the only person in the whole picture who looks out at you. You can see him with his hands in the corpse. Right? You can see him with his hands in the belly. In this case, he's actually dissecting a female patient, a female criminal. And that's remarkable. We looked before, we saw in the de Luzzi picture, you have an executed male, and roughly for every 1,000 men that were executed, you'd get one woman. We can talk about patriarchy all we want, but men were routinely executed for things. It took quite a bit more to execute a woman. There was a tremendous shortage of female bodies for doctors to study. So notice what you have here. I'm going to go back. If you look at the scene in full, these are public lessons in dissection. They literally would have public lessons at the university where not just students, but the town itself important people in the town would turn out to watch a dissection. Look at them crowding into the anatomical theater here, crowding around the body where that knowledge is being revealed. Notice, like in the picture with de Luzzi, the anatomist Vesalius has his fingers in the womb, right? Why did they open the belly first? Because that's where all the most corruptible stuff was. That's where all the water is, all the water of the gut. That's what makes a body rot quickly. It's what makes it smell bad. They didn't have refrigeration. They had to go in right away. And you can see just this frenzy of activity in this great 1543 anatomical textbook. What Vesalius did is, rather than read from a chair while somebody who didn't know the medicine opened the body, he now steps up to talk about empirical, and the Catholic Church, look at the upper left-hand corner, monks were invited, bishops were invited, popes themselves attended these dissections. The idea that the church stood in the way of this absolute empiricism, where the doctor with the knowledge opens the cadavers himself to see what's in them. That's how you got empirical progress. This is Padua, the University of Padua. That's the actual anatomical theater, it's still there, that they studied in. You can see the table is at the bottom there, where the body would be, and the students would literally be piled in these rows and rows, almost completely straight up, right? They'd be looking over and peering down into the wonders that happened on the dissection table. And of course, By the time you get to 1559, this is Realdo Colombo's anatomical textbook, the De Re Anatomica, on anatomical things. The man with the long beard in the center of the picture holding the knife, that's the anatomist Realdo Colombo. He, among other things, he suggests in his text the pulmonary circulation of the blood. William Harvey, the Englishman, would get credit for the discovery in 1618, but in 1559, Colombo actually suggested it first in a European context. And what's really remarkable about this picture is the man immediately to the right of Colombo, the man pointing to himself, the tall man on the right, that's Michelangelo. The great artist of the Renaissance, the great Catholic spiritual artist Michelangelo, was teaming up with the great dissector of human bodies to be able to better they were going to do a textbook together where the doctor cut the body open and identified things, and the great artist would then draw the pictures. What a textbook that would have made if Colombo had lived. He died the very year he published his book. And one last one here as we wind up. This then in Protestant Europe. The Protestant Europeans, by the time you get to 1519, 1520, you've got the Protestant Reformation. And in Protestant countries up north now, you're getting the same things. This is the University of Leiden in the Low Countries, the Leiden Anatomy Theater, 1620. And I want to close with this. When these wonderful theaters designed to show people the empirical reality of the human body, right? Science, this is modern science, sanctioned entirely, in this case, by the Protestant church, right? That the churches did not stand in the way of these kind of empirical processes. But in the daytime, when this particular Protestant anatomical theater, when it wasn't being used to dissect human bodies, it was being used as a museum of death. And as you can see, tourists are walking through the museum in the daytime. At the very center, a couple of tourists happen to pull back a sheet on the central table and expose the dissected body. Again, the hollowed out abdomen. And all around this wonderful, almost astronomical rendering where you've got the center of the table is the body, and like all the planets that rotate the Earth, you have these concentric circles emanating around where knowledge is. And notice how many bones and skeletons have been articulated, put together, and they carry, in this scientific theater, they carry moral messages. We are dust and shadows. Remember, man, that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. And so we begin our study of the medieval university with the advent of the Protestant university, which, like the Catholic, very empirical, very much in support of research, and yet never lost sight of the spiritual and even the moral dimensions of what science should be up to. We live in an age today, of course, where morality and science are going this way. They lived in an age where they were doing this, to the benefit of both science and faith. And that's our initial look at the medieval universities.